네.
Meledak di aku ya, Bang? Ada.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalatu wassalamu ala asrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in amma ba'du. Honorable Mr. Ventje Rahardjo, Executive Director of Komite Nasional Ekonomi dan Keuangan Syariah or KNEKS. Honorable Dr. Lana Soelistyaningsih, Member of the Board of Commissioner as well as CEO of Lembaga Penjamin Simpanan or LPS. Our invited speaker, Mr. Herwin Bustaman, Chairman of Non-Regulatory Committee, Indonesia Islamic Bank Association, who is also Director of Islamic Banking Unit of Bank Permata. Mr. Ashraf Gomma, Regional Head, Sharia and Governance, CIMB Islamic Malaysia. Mr. Sohaib Umar from AAOIFI, Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institution, who is also advisor to Central Bank of Bahrain. And Mr. Cecep Maskanul Hakim, member of the National Sharia Board of Indonesia, who also Assistant Director in Bank Indonesia. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to International Webinar on Exploring Innovation in Islamic Banks, Pro and Cons of Tawarruq and Other Possible Alternatives. This webinar is organized by Komite Nasional Ekonomi dan Keuangan Syariah, or KNEKS, Ikatan Ahli Ekonomi Islam or IAEI, Lembaga Penjamin Simpanan, and Bank Indonesia. This webinar actually is part of Road to ISEF, Indonesia Sharia Economic Forum, which will organize next month, apparently. And today, agenda of our today webinar is consist as follows. First, opening remark by Mr. Ventje Rahardjo. Second, keynote speech by Dr. Lana Soelistyaningsih. Third, main agenda, which later on we will divide into 3 segments, and question and answers. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let we start the webinar with opening remark by Mr. Ventje Rahardjo. Mr. Ventje, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Pak Ronald. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
The Honorable Ibu Lana Soelistyaningsih, the Chief Executive Officer of Indonesia Deposit Insurance Corporation, distinguished speakers and participants, all praises to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala and peace upon our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Alhamdulillah, today we meet in this good occasion to attend the webinar on Tawarruq as part of the Indonesia Sharia Economic Festival 2020, which is held from August 7th until October 31st, 2020. Let me use this opportunity to thank Bank Indonesia, the LPS, the Indonesia Deposit Insurance Corporation, IAEI, the Indonesian Association of Islamic Economists, as well as KNEKS team, and all the distinguished participants for their good time to spare with us to make this events possible. Ladies and gentlemen, towards the Indonesian vision to be the prominent hub of the Islamic economy Sharia globally in 2024, attempts are made by KNEKS to strengthen the capacity, governance, and infrastructure of the Indonesian Sharia economy. It involves, among others, utilization of Islamic financing akad more rigorously as to be implemented in Indonesia as to be able to find more competitive edge of the Islamic finance vis-a-vis the conventional finance. One of the akad available is Tawarruq, or in some other country region is popularly called commodity murabaha. Since Tawarruq has been used to facilitate different Islamic banking transaction through commodity trading. There are strong operational support and infrastructure, such as London Metal Exchange (LME) and Bursa Souk Al-Sila. This has an efficient commodity platform specifically designed to support Tawarruq with or without commodity brokers to the choice structure that bridges cross-country Islamic banking transactions. Multiple countries that use Tawarruq akad are Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Bangladesh, as well as United Kingdom. Malaysia is one of the countries in which Tawarruq is implemented widely, from deposits and financings to hedging transactions. Several other countries follow the Sharia standard issued by AAOIFI, which limits the use of Tawarruq only for liquidity management and overcoming operational difficulties. Ladies and gentlemen, since we are aware that especially during this pandemic period, the Indonesia has still have a limited instrument for hedging and liquidity management. Sharia compliant commodity trading and Tawarruq might have the potential to resolve these issues, particularly in Indonesia. It might be used to capture business opportunities with respect to some specific transactions where there is no efficient scheme of akad that can be implemented, such as asset sales scheme, subrogation, Islamic hedging, as well as the FX derivatives. In addition, Tawarruq might be utilized to improve features in existing financial products of Islamic banks. However, there are some discussion. Most scholars and regulators view that Tawarruq is still supposed to be the contract of last resort and only be used when an Islamic financial institution is a roadblock with a particular product. One of the reasons is because of a wider implementation of Tawarruq might lead to a reducing use of other Sharia-based akads, such as Mudarabah, Musyarakah, and Idarah. Many also argue that the main issue of Tawarruq is actually the intention of the contract itself. That intention might not be trade in commodities, but to create debt via a trading transaction. Therefore, there might be no linkage between real sector and financial sector in the transaction, which contradicts the principle of Islamic finance. This perspective is harmful not only for Islamic bank implementing Tawarruq, but also for the overall Islamic finance industry. It might increase the reputation risk of the Islamic finance industry is too similar with the conventional counterpart in its business model and operation. Other than this, Islamic banking industry should still strengthen its capacity and to face the challenging circumstances in the future. Considering the pros and cons, we need to open a room for discussion to explore every aspect of Tawarruq from the perspective of regulators, Sharia scholars, and Islamic banking practitioners, as well as other possible akads or mechanisms that could resolve the issues faced by Islamic banks. Therefore, I would like to encourage and welcome all speakers to share their views and knowledge in this matter. And we hope that this seminar can provide the diverse perspectives from each institution in different countries to enhance Islamic banking capability, especially to ease the liquidity problems during the COVID-19 pandemic. Finally, I do hope that all of you will have productive dialogue and fruitful discussions during this webinar. Thank you for your kind attention. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Ventje Rahardjo, for very interesting and informative opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, let we go to the next agenda. Keynote by Dr. Lana Soelistyaningsih, CEO of Lembaga Penjamin Simpanan or LPS. Dr. Lana, the time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Pak Ronald. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Honorable Mr. Ventje Rahardjo, Executive Director for National Islamic Economic and Finance Committee, distinguished speakers, Mr. Bustaman, Mr. Gomma, Mr. Umar, and Mr. Hakim, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to praise Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala for His blessing so that all of us can attend this great international webinar organized by the Indonesia Association of Islamic Economists, National Islamic Economic and Finance Committee, Indonesia Deposit Insurance Corporation, and Bank Indonesia. On behalf of IDIC, I also would like to congratulate the organizer for organizing this international webinar. It is truly an honor for me this afternoon to be able to share our thoughts among widely known Islamic economists and practitioners. Inshallah, this webinar, in which addressing the important issue of Tawarruq, of its pros and cons and other possible alternatives, will add valuable insight to all the participants. Distinguished guests, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, along with the speech, I also would like to present some graphs accordingly. Probably the organizer could share the slides. Okay. We can start with slide number 3. As we all know, the development of global Islamic banking industry shows an excellent prospect. Global Islamic banking assets have grown from $1.3 billion in 2012 to $1.8 billion in 2018. The growth is also projected to $2.2 billion in 2024. Islamic banking assets expanded at a compound annual growth rate of 7% in the third quarter of 2019. Meanwhile, the financing growth remains stable at 5.3% year-on-year. In the third quarter of 2019, Islamic banking experienced an increase in domestic market share in 27 countries, while remaining unchanged in 7 others, including Iran and Sudan, which both have 100% domestic market shares. Meanwhile, if we see the graph on the right side, the Indonesia Islamic banking share in total banking assets by country in the third quarter of 2019 is still quite low, about below 10%, compared to, let's say, Malaysia, of close to 40%. Despite still low market share, we could see on the next slide, please. Slide number 4. The asset, financing, and deposit of Islamic banking in Indonesia have gradually expanded over a decade. As of March 2020, assets of Islamic banking in Indonesia reached rupiah 536 trillion, or roughly it grows by 18% annually from 2007 to March 2020. Financing reached about 370 trillion rupiah, or grow by 23% annually from the period of 2007 to March 2020. And the deposit reached to about 423 trillion rupiah, or grow by 24% annually from the same period. Meanwhile, the number of Islamic banks in Indonesia is among the largest compared to other countries. There are 163 Islamic rural banks and 20 Islamic business units and 14 Islamic commercial banks in Indonesia by March 2020. However, the concern more on the market share of Islamic banking as of March, which is still quite low. Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, we understand that we are still facing some challenges in developing the Islamic banks in Indonesia. The fact that Islamic banks, after operating for almost 30 years in Indonesia, the market share, as we know, is still quite low. It's really big homework that needs to be resolved. Next slide, please. A number of challenges need to be addressed in order to encourage more competitive growth in Islamic banking in Indonesia. First, Islamic banks still have relatively less capital as compared to their conventional counterparts. Consequently, the potential growth of the Islamic banks is still limited as well. Therefore, innovation in alternative funding for Islamic banks are needed. Second, the non-performing finance (NPF) of Islamic bank is also still relatively higher than non-performing loan or NPL of conventional banks. Even though it has much improved in the last several years, accordingly, innovation in better credit risk management is also needed. The third one, the ratio of operating expenses to operating income is relatively higher due to high cost of funds. In addition, increased provision expenses and decreased financing income as a result of high non-performing financing also drive high operating expense to operating income ratio. Thus, Islamic banks need innovation to increase their efficiency. And the fourth challenge, Islamic banks need more stable core deposit as their main funding. A stable liquidity is important to encourage more financial intermediation, higher financing to deposit ratio by Islamic banks. Therefore, more innovation are needed to maintain or strengthen Islamic banks' deposit base. Finally, there might still be some gaps between available Islamic banking products and consumer needs. More innovation in Islamic banking products and services are needed to make their products and services more acceptable to the market. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and speakers, in several last minutes of my speech, I would like to discuss on an innovative mechanism to structure financing and deposit products, as well as tools for liquidity management and hedging, namely Tawarruq. This innovation has been introduced in many Muslim countries, including Malaysia. Tawarruq actually is, in a simple way, is kind of a mechanism of buying an asset from third party, for example, with deferred basis, and selling it to other party on cash basis with lower price. As a result, the first party generates cash from this transaction, with liability to pay it back in the form of installment. Islamic banks can utilize Tawarruq as an underlying mechanism to structure financing and deposit products, as well as tools for liquidity management and hedging. Several benefits of Tawarruq: it is a flexible way of acquiring liquidity. The customer can obtain the cash immediately. Second, the benefit of Tawarruq is easy to execute, and also it can be used for multi-purpose financing. However, the application of Tawarruq is not without critics, including in Indonesia. Some noticeable critics of Tawarruq are: Tawarruq might create new debts that are larger than the cash received. Thus, several parties argue that there is no difference between this practice with riba-based loan in conventional banks. The exchange of money now with more money in the future is considered risky due to the uncertainty about the future value of money. Tawarruq as one of debt-based instruments increases inequality and redistribute wealth in favor of suppliers of finance as respective of actually productivity of the supplied finance. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell this. What I have mentioned are in the next slide. Ladies and gentlemen, an innovation usually always comes with some pros and cons. Therefore, it must be discussed, tested, and re-evaluated thoroughly. The Tawarruq concept is not an exception, of course. And to end off my speech this afternoon, I encourage more future research and thought on this innovation as well as other area of innovation in order to nourish the growth and development of the Islamic banking industry, especially in Indonesia. I earnestly hope that the discussion today will benefit all of us. Thank you very much for your attention. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I wish all of you could enjoy the rest of the webinar. Thank you. I give the time back to Mr. Ronald. Pak Ronald.
Terima kasih Bu Lana. Thank you so much Dr. Lana Soelistyaningsih, the CEO of Lembaga Penjamin Simpanan. Ladies and gentlemen, now we go into our main agenda today. We together with us we have 4 prominent speakers, and for the first session there will be a sharing of knowledge from Mr. Herwin Bustaman and Mr. Ashraf Gomma Ali. Mr. Herwin Bustaman is chairman of non-regulatory committee of ASBISindo, or Association of Islamic Bank in Indonesia. He is a professional with more than 25 years of experience in the areas of management consulting, fast-moving consumer goods, and in the past 15 years in Islamic banking. He has worked for several multinational companies such as Fruit Food Consulting, PNG, and HSBC. He is currently in charge of the Islamic business in one of the local banks, the Permata Banks, and also head of non-regulatory compartment in Asosiasi Bank Sharia Indonesia, or ASBISindo. And Mr. Herwin graduated from University of South Queensland and International Islamic University for his MBA. Ladies and gentlemen, here Mr. Herwin Bustaman. Mr. Herwin, the time is yours.
Ya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Honorable Pak Ventje Rahardjo, CEO of KNEKS, and Honorable Bu Lana Soelistyaningsih from CEO of LPS, distinguished speakers, Ashraf, Pak Cecep, Pak Sohaib, and also our moderator, Pak Ronald. And also the participants, distinguished participants. I think before we go straight to the urgency to have Tawarruq, allow me to spend 5 to 10 minutes on the update from Indonesian Sharia finance. If we go to slide number 1, Mas Reza. So basically, if we go to, this one, okay. If you look at in terms of market share, most of the Sharia finance, the market share is less than 8%, except for 2, for government bonds and also for mutual funds, the one highlighted in red box. Despite, for example, for Sharia Bank, the first one, it was established way back in 91. After almost 30 years, the market share is still at 6.13%. We will elaborate more on the issues that we faced by the industry. Insurance, it was established, the first one in 94. Market share is still at 3.1. But look at for government bonds and mutual funds. If there's a strong government push, we see that the market share could be double digit in less than 10 years. For examples, for mutual funds, the first one, I think it was launched in 97, the first Sharia compliant mutual fund, but only starting 2005, whereby the government allow only for Sharia compliant funds to fully invested overseas, 100% invested overseas, whereby for conventional mutual fund, maximum they can invest it offshore is only at 49%. So the market share goes up from basically 2 to 3% to 13.68%. Interesting one is actually on government bonds. Yeah, government bonds, it was practically non-existent before 2009. 2009 was the first retail sukuk and then followed by global sukuk in the same year. And look at the market share now, it's already close to 24%. So that's like, I think Pa Ventje mentioned clearly, if we want to be the global hub, global Islamic hub, by 2024, we need government support. Yeah, so for us to be able to grow a lot faster. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at the impact from COVID-19, I still remember mid-April, I was invited in one of the international webinar. I mentioned that inshallah, the Islamic finance or Islamic banks will continue to grow healthier, yeah, and also we will continue to grow our funding also for two reasons. I think if for those of you who are not Indonesians, we have implemented the large-scale social restrictions, or internationally known as lockdown, since 10 of April. But before that, mid of May, Jakarta schools and public spaces have been closed. Yeah. So the second quarter, we already get the impact from this COVID-19, yeah, from the lockdown. If you can look at the numbers, yeah, the highlighted in red box also, all this, the Sharia performance is actually much better than conventional one. If you look at the asset, we're still growing at 9.2%. So hopefully by the year end, we are still growing double digit. On loan side, we are actually growing at double digit, whereby in conventional it's only 1.6%. Deposit, we are growing close to 9%, conventional only close to 8%. PBT, we're still positive at 2.5%. Conventional is actually down by 17.1%. NPL, slight increase, but only 0.1% for conventional at plus 0.6% points. Car also still positive. LDR slight decrease, but again, net in net, I can say that the reason why the Sharia still facing manageable NPF simply because of we have less exposure on the badly hit industries such as the transportations, accommodations, restaurant, and also joint financing. Transportation simply because of we don't have expertise. The industry doesn't have expertise on airlines and all these big transportations. So we don't have exposure on this segment. Accommodations, because of the stringent requirement for Sharia, when we provide financing for hotel and all that, most of these big hotel chains, they will go to conventional financing. Restaurant also the same. Joint financing is quite interesting because since early 2018, the government removed the incentive for Sharia multi-finance, whereby there's no more lower down payment requirement for Sharia multi-finance. Because of that, we continue to face a depleting portfolio on multi-finance Sharia. But that actually blessing in disguise. This year, we are facing less restructuring applications from multi-financing through joint financing portfolio. Now, again, why do we still believe that Sharia can still grow double digit? First and foremost, if probably the Indonesian quite familiar with this one, Qanun law will be implemented since effectively 2021 in Aceh. So all the Sharia finance will have to be converted by 2021. So we will see influx of conversions from Banda Aceh, estimated from 20 to 25 billion coming out of Banda Aceh alone. Not to mention, because of there's no Hajj, BPKH fund or the Tabung Haji Indonesia funds will still be with the Sharia banks this year, estimated another 16 to 17 trillion. and also potentially conversions from to regional local development bank. That also will help the growth of the Sharia banks in Indonesia. Next slide, Mas Reza. Now, why do we need the viable structure for revolving financing? Yeah, viable Sharia structure. First and foremost, if we can look at the comparison between the purpose of the financing, yeah, in conventional and Sharia, we are still skewed towards consumer. 45% of our portfolio in consumer, whereby in conventionals, 45 is actually on working capital. This is because of we don't have a viable revolving Sharia structure. Yeah, out of this 45%, or translated to 2,525, 20% is actually overdraft. If we add on other revolving type of financing, that could go up to 30%. So we are losing at least 505 trillion potential conversions from conventional into Sharia, simply because of we don't have that structure. So because of that lack of evergreen facility, the Sharia banks will continue to grow, will be forced to actually continue to put double the efforts to cover the runoff from runoff term portfolios and to still grow the assets. So this is actually quite dangerous, you know, versus the conventional whereby they do have the evergreen type of facilities. Again, next one, I think this is also critical because logically speaking, Sharia banks should be providing financing for productive assets instead of for consumption. So we need this kind of product for us to be able to penetrate the commercials and corporate clients. The critical one, of course, next slide, I think. Now, what are the concerns over the Tawarruq structure? I think first and foremost, the first concern frequently raised by the academicians, by the scholars, or a certain degree to regulator. International Council.
3 minutes more.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Sure. We'll finish up. So, International Council of Fiqh Academy initiative under OIC in 2005 declared that Tawarruq is not permissible. But again, AAOIFI already issued Sharia Standard number 20, sales of commodities in organized market. This is still valid, and probably Mr. Sohaib, Umar can confirm on this one also. AAOIFI is drafting the accounting standard for commodity murabaha. So this is still relevant and still valid and referred by most of the Islamic banks globally. BI and DSN also have recognized the structure with the issuance of Fatwa number 822 on commodity trading, yeah, and also the adoptions of commodity trading in Fatwa number 96. So net, basically, the Indonesians do recognize that we can use the Tawarruq structure. Number two, concern over that this is a fictitious transactions and potentially a capital outflow. Ventje mentioned two names who can provide the or support the operations for Tawarruq, yeah, or commodity murabaha, and we have been talking to them, and they are willing to be audited, and will be willing to keep the funds locally. This is not to mention that JFX, Jakarta Future Exchange, is already able or capable to support the transactions. Number three, concern over the Tawarruq structure is not allowed in Indonesia because of then it will be basically killing all the akads. Yeah. The financing will be converted into a Tawarruq structure. I think the industry is asking a Tawarruq only for specific products such as for overdraft, personal financing, revolving loans, and profit rate swaps. Last but not least, the argument is that, look, there is a viable structure for revolving loans, such as a musyarakah. I think we have seen several cases where bank lost in the court simply because of that musyarakah structure. The client claimed that they are losing, and that loss has to be shared with the bank. Not to mention also big corporate clients, especially the listed companies, they are reluctant to submit the additional requirements such as the monthly business performance report for us to be able to calculate the revenue sharing. I think that's it from me. Thank you so much. I'll pass it on to Pak Ronald again.
Thank you, Mr. Herwin. Before there's some questions for you, but before that, let me go to our second speaker, Mr. Ashraf Gomma. Mr. Ashraf is regional head of Sharia and governance at CIMB Islamic, where he is responsible for all Sharia advisory and research affairs for CIMB Group, covering Southeast Asia and the UK. He previously worked with NCB Saudi Arabia for 6 years as Vice President of Sharia Assurance, where he was responsible for overseeing all policies and procedures at the bank, as well as providing Sharia advice on all Islamic products across the NCB Group. Mr. Ashraf holds BS in Finance from University of Maryland and LLB in Sharia from Qura University, as well as Master in Islamic Finance Practice from ISEF. So, Mr. Ashraf, the time is yours.
Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walah. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal hakim. Thank you very much, respected speakers, respected guests, and I'm very honored to be here. I'm always honored to be in discussions with the largest Muslim country in the world. And I always feel that whatever we say and whatever we do in Indonesia has reverberations around the entire ummah. So we need to make sure that we do it right in Indonesia. So inshallah, I want to share a few thoughts on Tawarruq, bi'idhnillah, from a Sharia perspective as well as a policy perspective. So inshallah, we can see the slides. Okay. So let's go to the first slide. And because I know that my colleagues in Indonesia love Islamic economics and they always look at the macro picture, I want to start with the macro picture. And if we look at the definition of Islamic economics, there are many definitions, but probably they all go back to the concept of maximization of human well-being, or falah, in this world and the next world. And I think this is really the worldview of what Islamic economics is about. It's not only this world, but it's also the next world. And the main pillars of Islamic economic worldview really go back to what Islam is all about. But when we talk about regarding economics, we talk about the oneness of God and God as the owner, God as the provider. And therefore, being that God is the owner of everything and he is the provider of everything, the obligation of human beings to be obedient to God, and the obligation of human beings to be the vicegerent of God in the world, to develop the world in an ethical way in line with the commands of God, and in line with the concept of amana, so the human being as a trustee, because a human being will be asked about their wealth, how they obtained it, and how they used it. And the way that we govern human actions goes back to the science of Sharia. So we're going to then talk about the maqasid of Sharia. So next slide. So this is very, of course, everyone I think is very familiar with the maqasid of Sharia, the 5 main universal goals: the protection of religion, life, intellect, family, and lineage, and wealth. And at each goal, we have different levels of prioritization: necessities, needs, and complements. So that the necessities make life bearable, the needs make life less difficult, and the complements make life beautiful. And we look at these both at the individual and collective level. So when we talk about protection of wealth, we need to protect the wealth of the individual as well as the country, as well as the ummah. And we're going to see how this connects with Islamic banking. So we go to the next slide. All right. Next. Okay. So is growing Islamic banking important, right? If we look at it from an Islamic economics perspective, what is the benefit of growing Islamic banking? So we saw that the market share of Islamic banking is 5.99%, right? When we grow Islamic banking, in essence, we are increasing the number of people who we are facilitating people to recognize the sovereignty of God in their transactions and be obedient to God and to develop the earth in a way that is in line with the Sharia concepts, as well as fulfillment of the trust, right, that God has given us. So in that sense, growing Islamic banking is essential for maximizing human well-being, because we say human well-being is in this world and the next world. If we look at Maqasid Sharia, it also is growing Islamic banking protects religion. How does it protect religion? Because you are first and foremost getting people out of riba. It protects life, intellect, family, and wealth. Firstly, through the screening mechanism that we do in Islamic banking, we do not finance any activity that is detrimental to any of the maqasid of Sharia. But also when it comes to the wealth aspect, and I think many people don't think about this, but the Quran says, Yamhaqullahu riba, that Allah will destroy riba. And so if riba is in the wealth, that riba, may actually destroy that wealth. So at the level of the individual and society, we want to remove riba as much as we can. So this is a necessity, or it's at the very least a need. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, now Sharia basis for Tawarruq. I want to go to the next slide. Okay, now my main source when I was doing this research really was the research paper that's published by IOFI that supports the IOFI standard. So first, the definition of Tawarruq has already been discussed. The primary proofs that you find scholars using is the ayah in the Quran, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى, that Allah has made all sales permitted. Similarly, similar ahadith. Also, the hadith about avoiding riba in dates. This answers a lot of the concerns that Tawarruq is a hila or is a trick. But yet we find that the Prophet ﷺ teaching one of the Sahaba a quote-unquote trick in order to avoid riba, when he was brought with some very high quality dates. And the Prophet ﷺ asked, how did you get these dates? And the Sahabi said that I had some low quality dates and I traded them for the high quality dates. And the Prophet ﷺ said, this is a riba. This is riba. So what you should do, take the low quality dates, sell them in the market, get the cash, and then buy the high quality dates. In all cases, he will result with the high quality dates, but the Prophet ﷺ explained how to avoid riba in the transaction. And basically what Tawarruq is this. Also, the word Tawarruq is used in the Hanbali madhab explicitly, but other madhahib use other words. And one of those words is called zarnaqa. And zarnaqa is exactly Tawarruq, which is buying something on a deferred basis with the intention to sell it on a spot basis for cash. And this was actually practiced by Aisha herself, the mother of the believers, as well as Ali radiallahu anhu, who said that he would not abandon Hajj even if he were to use zarnaqa, or basically Tawarruq. And I think maybe a lot of people may not be aware of those narrations. Also, all the four madhahib allow it. Imam al-Shafi'i has very explicit language allowing this, and Imam Ahmad and also the leading Hanafi scholars, as well as the Malikis, also allow it. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So there are some criticisms that I'll touch on very quickly. So Ibn Taymiyyah is one of the critics of Tawarruq. He does not follow the main Hanbali opinion in this regard, so he prohibits it, and he says it's a sale under duress, be'er muttar. But the response, as I put here, that the hadith itself is weak, and there's no real duress in modern banking transactions. The second is that it's a hila, a legal strategy for riba, and the scholars say the hila depends on your intention. So if your intention is to do something haram, using a strategy, it'll become haram. But here we find that the strategy that the person is employing with Tawarruq is to achieve a halal aim, which makes it halal and make the hila argument a weak argument. Another argument that it will open the door to riba when in actuality, the door to riba is already wide open, and we are trying to open the door to halal. So that is also a weak argument. If we go to the next one. Also, it is organized and different from classical tawarruq. If you look even in the AAOIFI paper and many other scholars, they say that all Islamic finance transactions are organized, whether it's murabaha or ijar or anything else. So that argument is problematic. And also that it will overtake Islamic financing modes. I think we hear this a lot, but actually these are all permissible, and all of the different modes are permissible. So the idea that we don't have any fard kifaya, that we have to do use a particular mode, or any preference that we have to use a particular mode, right? It's not something that's obligatory. So I think a lot of people use this argument, but it doesn't. I would venture to say it doesn't have a basis in Sharia. Finally, the person does not want the object of sale; they only want money. This is also not a valid argument against it, because when you buy something, you can have any halal use for it, and that one of the halal uses could be to sell it and to get the cash. So that's all, and we already mentioned that Aisha radiallahu anha herself and Ali radiallahu anhu himself practiced these types of transactions. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so OIC passed a resolution prohibiting organized tawarruq in 2003. They had primary concerns and secondary concerns. Primary concerns is that the condition of possession of the commodities, which is a condition for the legitimacy of the sale, was not met in many cases. And this is understandable back in 2003. Now banks have evolved, commodity suppliers have evolved, 17 years later. They're also concerned about the transaction being fictitious. But I would venture to say that here, it means that the transaction itself is invalid. Secondary concerns relate to the agency role of the bank to liquidate the commodity, making it similar to a sale. And I would say that this is a secondary concern. Even in the research paper of AAOIFI, this is not highlighted as a significant issue. So all of these things were basically addressed in the AAOIFI Tawarruq Sharia standard. A lot of people think that the AAOIFI standard is against the OIC. No, the AAOIFI standard came 3 years later, considered the OIC issues, and basically harmonized. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, and now I just want to touch on the Malaysian practice here. We go to the next slide. Because Malaysian, in our Sharia standards, we take AAOIFI as a base, and then we work on it, and any exceptions typically are due to public policy and maslaha based on our circumstances. So if you compare the definition, basic definitions, basic rules are the same between AAOIFI standard and BNM. Okay, next one. Next slide. When we come to the key controls which of Tawarruq, we find that there are no differences between the key controls in AAOIFI and the key controls in BNM. And I venture to say that these are the main concerns of the OIC Fiqh Academy fatwa. Okay, and today we have central bank audits of the bank practices to make sure that they are fulfilling all of these key controls, and also banks are auditing the commodity suppliers, and commodity platforms are being designed with Sharia scholars and Sharia boards and supervision to make sure that all of these controls are in place. Okay, so let's go to the next one. And then where are the differences? The differences between the AAOIFI standard and the BNM one relate to the agency role. AAOIFI is currently in line with the OIC Fiqh Academy because it does not open the door for the bank to play an active agent role in the transaction, in especially liquidating the commodities, except where the customer cannot do it himself. BNM took a different approach. They took a more liberal approach, and based on public policy, I would say, and based on need, because this agency issue is not a clear-cut, Sharia requirement, where if you do this, the transaction becomes invalid. I would venture to say, and Allah knows best, it's more from Sadd al-Dhariya. So we find that this difference here based on need. Okay, let's go to the next one. Oh, and I just want to say something. This is where the central Sharia authorities have to come in. You have the standard, but then the Mufti, when he gives a fatwa, and this is throughout Islamic history, when the Mufti gives a fatwa, he has to look at the special circumstance. And I think that would be the role of the Diwan Sharia Nasional and the Sharia committees in Indonesia when implementing a rule like this. My final slide is how do we do Sharia-based Tawarruq policy? So firstly, 4 points. First point is that providing alternatives to Muslims to conventional banking products is a necessity to protect religion and wealth. If we have, this is something based on our worldview, right? Secondly, these alternatives must be competitively priced with similar convenience and customer experience. It's a need. Why it's a need? Because if you don't have that, it will be difficult to convince people to do Islamic if they have to pay more, or if it takes longer, or if it's slower, or if it's less, convenient. Then you will find that people will prefer riba, unfortunately, and it's our responsibility to fulfill this need. Thirdly, Tawarruq is a permissible financing method according to all madhabs and all madhabs. It's important to realize that. And if you read, it's very interesting when you read all of the statements of the madhahib, how deeply rooted this issue is. The necessary controls in the OIC Fiqh Academy are already reflected in the IOFI standard. So if we follow the IOFI standard, we are okay. Finally, in cases where no viable alternatives exist to fulfill the above necessities and needs, allowing tawarruq is both in line with Sharia and the goals of Islamic economics. And I don't want to go as far as to say it's a must, but maybe I can say it's a must, because we have to realize that we have to fulfill the needs and we have to fulfill the necessities. And Allah knows best. And أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم بارك الله فيكم. Thank you so much for your time and your listening.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ashraf and Mr. Herwin. I have some question for you here. First, maybe for Mr. Herwin, is there, what are the main problems faced by the market players actually? Why they do not want to use the services of Islamic banks that it's supposed to be offered by the Tawarruq? And second question is there any product developments that have been taken by Islamic banks in Indonesia? To try to find another solution instead of the Tawarruq.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Ronald. I think as of now, 2 DSN fatwas have adopted the Tawarruq structure. One is actually for the interbank. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's actually fatwa number 82. Yeah. And then another one actually for the tahawud also, tahawud suk asila, if I'm not mistaken. That's actually fatwa number 96. So these two concepts actually have the Tawarruq structure is accepted by DSN and also regulator. But we need to use the same structure for overdraft, revolving loan, profit rate swap, and ideally personal loan. So these 4 structure that we don't have available Sharia structure at this stage. We have tried to actually use musyarakah, as I mentioned earlier, but then again, banks, the Sharia banks are taking more risk due to the fact that it is a profit and loss sharing mechanism. Second, the clients are reluctant. Especially for the listed companies, they are reluctant to submit additional report, business performance report, for us, the bank, to be able to calculate the revenue sharing calculations. I think those are the 2. Yeah, we have been trying to actually submit or had several initial discussions, but the suggestions from be it the regulator, also from the DSN, to find another alternative structure. I think that's the status as of now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Herwin. Now to Mr. Ashraf. In Malaysia, we know that VNM allow the use of the Tawarruq, even with the Securities Commission established the Bursa Sukila. But is there any Sharia scholar as well in Malaysia that challenged the idea of the Tawarruq? That's my first question. The second one is how, I mean, the issue of Tawarruq actually in many discussions rely on there's no real movement of the asset of or the commodity. But how Islamic banks in Malaysia ensure that, I mean, there is possible movement in the asset between the parties who transaction in the Tawarruq?
Alhamdulillah, thank you very much for those excellent questions. The first, are there any Sharia scholars who challenge this? Based on, I cannot purport to know what every Sharia scholar's opinion is, but based on my surveying of the environment here, and no, none of them are challenging it. That may be due to the fact that, of course, this fatwa was made at the highest level, at the SAC level, both, and it's in practice both at the SC as well as in the banking sector. Also, you know, Malaysia is a Shafi'i country, so many of the classically trained scholars are Shafi'i, and Shafi'is are the most liberal with this. They even allow bay'ina. So of course, Tawarruq is even more likely to be allowed. So that's one thing. I haven't seen any scholars against this, but what we have found is that the central bank is trying to give some incentives to innovate in other areas. So for example, in the sukuk market, although we allow 100% Tawarruq based sukuk, but there are tax incentives for having a non-Tawarruq based sukuk, having wakala sukuk or hybrid sukuk. The second, regarding the movement of the asset, really, and I say this with all being unbiased. The work that Borsa Suq Sila has done is unmatched. And when I was in Saudi Arabia, I also did a lot of research on commodity suppliers. And so if you look at the controls that Borsa Suq Sila puts in place, where they actually, the way they onboard the suppliers, there's a rigorous process, and they ensure that the suppliers have the goods available. And then when the banks purchase from the suppliers, the commodities will be sold, of course, to the customers, and then sold back to Borsa eventually if delivery is not taken. And Borsa has made such that their system does not allow the commodities to be sold back to the same original supplier. So actually, the commodities never go back to the same supplier. So the commodities will go from supplier 1 and to the bank, to the customer, and then go to supplier 2, 3, or 4 in every transaction. And that is a step that they did in order to ensure this movement, and also to ensure that the commodities do not go back to the original supplier, which is one of the AAOIFI requirements as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ashraf and Mr. Herwin. I think we will come back to you again later on. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me go to the second segment. We will talk from regulatory and Sharia perspective, from the international organization perspective, especially, and also from the National Central Sharia Board in Indonesia. Our first speaker for the second segment is Mr. Sohaib Umar from AAOIFI. He's also advisor to the Central Bank of Bahrain. Is a senior Islamic finance professional with 25 years of diverse experience in central banking, advisory, private equity, and capital market. And Mr. Sohaib is also responsible in a CBB for recommending overseeing new strategic initiative and on regulation in Islamic banking, takaful, and capital market segment. He's also serving as administrator of Wakaf Fund of CBB, and he was executive manager at Ernst & Young in Bahrain. He has MBA in finance and also CFA. So without further ado, Mr. Sohaib Umar, the time is yours.
Assalamualaikum. Am I audible? Can you hear me properly?
Yes, sure. Yes, Mr. Sohaib.
Okay, okay, all right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here on this forum. I was listening to the presentations with interest, and I think it's a very interesting and important topic, Tawarruq, whether to allow it and to let it perpetuate in a market like Indonesia, which has a decision to take today, because Islamic finance is still a small portion of the overall Indonesian banking market share. It will become difficult after some time if you allow now and then decide to unwind later, because when it becomes a larger market, then unwinding those Tawarruq positions becomes very, very difficult. I think I would want to go through the slides that I had sent out. So if you could kindly put up the slide number 1. Now, we have heard from Mr. Ashraf Gomali about the permissibility of Tawarruq from a Sharia point of view. No doubt the 4 mazahib allow the transaction, but permissibility is one thing, and the prudential part of it is another, meaning something may be permissible, but from a societal perspective or from an economic perspective, it may not be the best thing for the economy or for the society. So what I've done here is I've summarized some of the negative effects of Tawarruq. Now, the first one and the most important one is that there is a disconnect between the real and the financial economy. You will see that in all of the other Islamic finance products, when there is a financial product, there is also a one-to-one correlation with the real economy. Whether it is murabaha or ijara or mudaraba or anything else, there is a one-to-one correlation. That is, if there is a financial economy of $100, there is a real economy transaction backing that up by at least $100. In case of Tawarruq, this is not the case. And this is just about the only product that doesn't have this connection. We have seen what happened in the 2008 financial crisis when the conventional world had this connection broken, and this led to the financial economy being about 8 or 10 times more than the real economy. And the point related to that is that there is debt accumulation which is out of line with economic growth. So you may have a $60–70 trillion global economy, but the overall debt could be 2, 3 times, 4 times that amount. And Tawarruq helps you in doing that, because the commodity remains the same, but you can have multiple Tawarruq transactions on the same commodity. This leads to basically a rise in the systemic risk due to unhealthy financial innovation. So there is this tendency that sometimes we equate scientific innovation with financial innovation. The two are very different. Scientific innovation almost always is a value addition to the overall economy and to society. Financial innovation, on the other hand, could be good, bad, or neutral, because with each new financial product being introduced in the system, the overall systemic risk rises. And sometimes there is a genuine need of that product, and therefore you sustain that rise in systemic risk. And sometimes you have to decide whether you actually need this product, or the rise in systemic risk is so much that you have to disallow that product. So financial innovation you have to be much more careful about versus scientific innovation. Also, there is this genuine point of Tawarruq eating up the other products, We have seen it in markets where initially Tawarruq was just one of the many products, but over a period of 5, 10, 15 years, it has become the dominant product, and in some markets, almost the only product. We have also seen the reverse of it in other markets, such as Oman, for example, which did not allow Tawarruq from the start. It actually helped innovation in various areas. So you had products coming up on healthcare financing, on education financing, even marriage financing. Previously, if you had allowed Tawarruq, you would have just one product for all of these needs. Now you have different products for these fulfillment of these needs. Also, there is a moral question, I think, here, that if we allow Islamic banks to be just liquidity conduits for conventional banking systems through Tawarruq, is that morally and ethically allowed? So I, as a customer of an Islamic bank, I put my money there because I know that it is going to be used in a Sharia compliant manner. And I never banked with a conventional bank. Little do I know that the Islamic bank has taken my money and of other people like me, and it has pooled it together and either given it to a conventional bank or to a conventional parent based on Tawarruq. So should an Islamic bank be allowed to deal with a conventional bank based on Tawarruq? Because you don't have any restriction or any influence over the use of money in case of Tawarruq, because it's a simple sale purchase transaction. So when you are dealing with conventional banks on the basis of Tawarruq, this moral question also arises. And then, of course, there are frequent abuses. Even in the best, even if all the proper protocols and processes are observed, the above 5 ills of Tawarruq will remain there. But if there is an abuse, and we know there are many, then that's an additional sore point as far as Tawarruq is concerned. So in conclusion, I would say that while Tawarruq may be permissible from a Sharia perspective, for a central bank to allow a product, it is not just a Sharia related issue. It is also an economic issue. It is also a financial sector risk issue, and it is also a societal issue. And from all of these points of view, I think this is a product that is better not to be allowed, and not to be allowed unabated anyway. Now we move on to the next slide, which is AAOIFI's position on Tawarruq. AAOIFI's standard, Sharia standard number 30, deals with the monetization, which is another name for Tawarruq or commodity murabaha. It says basically 3 things. Number 1, and I'm just summarizing here, but in the slide, you can read the actual Sharia standard. It says 3 things. Number 1, if you are practicing Tawarruq on the asset side, then you cannot be the agent for the customer to organize the whole transaction, to sell it back to a supplier, etc. Let the customer do it on his own. To the best of my knowledge, none of the banks anywhere practices this. The other 2 points are about when the bank itself is the beneficiary of Tawarruq, meaning it is raising money through Tawarruq. So there are 2 restrictions that the Sharia standard puts on the banks there. Number 1, the bank cannot deal with the conventional bank on Tawarruq. And number 2, the bank can use Tawarruq to raise funding only when it's it's under liquidity shortage, or there is a severe operational crunch on the bank, and there is no other way to raise money other than Tawarruq, which is kind of an emergency situation. So in that case, it can do that. So with these 3 restrictions, if you allow Tawarruq, then it will greatly reduce the ills that I have discussed in the previous slide. But as far as I know, none of the markets in the world are actually following these three restrictions that AAOIFI Sharia Standard number 30 has put on banks for Tawarruq transactions. And in the absence of these restrictions, all of the ills that we have spoken about, you can see there. We have seen it here in Bahrain. We can see it in Malaysia, in Saudi Arabia, in a number of other markets. It is rather unfortunate because most of the alternatives for Tawarruq do exist. There are some markets which are trying it. And the problem though is that it cannot be a perfect solution to Tawarruq. It is not sensible to think that in terms of convenience for the banker, in terms of convenience for the customer, and in terms of the risk, it will be the same as Tawarruq. Because Tawarruq is very close to the conventional lending transaction. So if convenience and cost is all that you seek, you might as well stick with conventional. If you want Islamic, there is going to be an additional risk that you have to take. And in some cases, maybe some additional cost as well. But that's the nature of the transaction. So I would stop here. Probably I can take, I can elaborate more in terms of the alternatives, but maybe when the Q&A starts.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sohaib. And ladies and gentlemen, we go to the next speakers. My senior, my guru, and my friend, Mr. Cecep Maskanul Hakim. Mr. Cecep is currently a member of Plenary Committee of National Sharia Board, Indonesian Council of Ulama. He also a member of Joint Working Group, IFSB, AAOIFI on Sharia Governance. Mr. Cecep has various experience related to advisory, Sharia advisory in Malaysian Securities Commissions, International Islamic Liquidity Management, and he also Assistant Director at the Department of Islamic Economic and Finance, Central Bank of Indonesia. Mr. Cecep was graduated from International Islamic University in Islamabad and for the bachelor degree, and International Institute of and Kuliah of Economic in International Islamic University of Malaysia for his master degree. So, Mr. Cecep, the time is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Ronald. Thank you, Mr. Ronald. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Mr. Sohaib Umar, Brother Herwin, Brother Ashraf, if still there, Ventje and Ibu Lana, and others audience. Very happy to be here to involved in discuss with the issue we deal with already 14 or 16 years ago in Indonesia. So been still dealing with it. Actually talking about Tawarruq, we cannot avoid, if we are talking with more of a commodity, the product which is already applied by some banks to National Sharia Board to given the fatwas and of Sovereign Indonesia, both which I've been there. So, but I would like to start with the condition of economic condition 1998 in which we are. Brother Yoshi, can you slide share, which I already sent you with about half an hour, 1 hour ago. So
Mas Reza mungkin bisa di-share screen-nya.
So the situation in 1998 in Islamic, all banks are under recession and going into a financial and economic problem recession. Next. So we are all banks, financial institutions are freeze to deal with the derivative products, foreign exchange products. While we, Islamic bank that time just turned 6 years old and should cope with this problem rising in conventional banks. So when amendment of Islamic Banking Act is done in 1998, and dual banking system also dual system banking is introduced, then other banks are rise up. But the situation and the circumstances are still held that the coming to conclusion that the derivative products and foreign exchange products become the devil of the crisis, the cause of the crisis. So government, the central bank, and other players in market should exercise prudential policy in applying any product. We remember that even our letter of credit, it just recognized and accepted 5 years or 4 years after the crisis, 2002, start to be again accepted by banking, foreign banking at that time. So next slide. In 2000, National Sharia Board by Bank Indonesia to give fatwas on standardized products for Islamic banking. So based on practice of banking, we divide the product into three categories of products. First is fund mobilization, second is financing, and third is service. So fund mobilization product, we almost copied from Islamic banking practice in Malaysia, in which current account, saving account, and investment account are both using can use Moderator, except the investment account only Moderator in practice, not using Wadia. While a current account and saving account, we use both. Some people using Wadia, some using Moderator. Rural banking may be the one who extensively using Wadia account for saving. Financing using Murabah Salam Istisah for sales and Moderator Musyarakah for profit sharing or revenue sharing, that popular in that time, and also Ijara for rent. And then after that it was developed from these products, many products, housing, service, agriculture, and the service we are using Wakala, Kafala, and then after that we develop into Rahan, pawn shop. Yeah. Next slide. By 2010, almost 15 years later, Islamic banking in Indonesia have their own money market instruments, both for investment and liquidity purposes. Example, both those who in Indonesia, they are familiar with CIMB, Certificate Investasi Mudharabah, Interbank Mudharabah Investment Certificate. And then after that, we have Jum'ala certificate. The product which is only utilized by central bank cannot be applied by commercial bank. It is for money market operation actually. And then Moderator short-term financing facility, Bank Indonesia product as lender of last resort, and then Moderator deposit facility. Indonesia they call it FASB, and then Indonesia repo and reverse repo just recently 2013 until now. And by 2008, capital market has Islamic products as investment and liquidity instruments. Suppose corporate ijarah sukuk, corporate mudarabah sukuk. I think it is typo error. And then government ijarah sukuk. After government issues Islamic Securities Act in number 21, 2008 was issued. So I got this chart blocking my view. So government retail ijarah and also global ijarah. Next slide. So there was a proposition by financial institutions to have murabahah commodities since 2004. So firstly, they apply for financing. After they don't have after they use that for limited purposes, and then they try to apply also in deposit product fund mobilization, and they propose also for liquidity management and also for foreign exchange transaction. So while as I said before that by 2010, actually central bank already provide liquidity and investment instrument for financial institutions. So again, I remind you about the circumstances after crisis 1998, that prudentiality finance when quite rigid and quite what do you call it, over scared about the inflation after they experience what do you call it, hyperinflation in 1930. So any 1% of inflation, they will rapidly respond it by a certain measure on end instruments. Next slide. So what is the National Sharia Board reply for this proposition? So National Sharia Board will not issue fatwa on Tawarruq nor INA, since both matters have been discussed widely and in details by ulamas in fiqh muamalah. So the fiqh products for this akad is already over. I mean, the discussion is already complete. So both methods will appear in details in fatwas as emergency solution to certain conditions. So it is the application will have a problem in our practice. So in 2007, in response to a proposal by murabahability in financing product, National Sharia Board allowed bank to apply commodity murabah in a financing project with conditions. I remember about 21 conditions given by Sharia Board to a certain bank to comply conditions. But the bank refused because they can fulfill only 13 or 15 conditions. Next slide. And then coming to 2006, Bank Negara Malaysia invited Sharia Board and advisor for Islamic Bank Southeast Asia in first Mudzakarah Ulama Nusantara in Langkawi, Malaysia The issue is to discuss the application of INA and Tawarruq in Islamic banking. What is the result? The result is that INA and Tawarruq are controversial methods among the ulamas. So some ulamas allow, some ulamas do not allow. There is hadith who refuse INA, but they call it is weak hadith. There is hadith of the mentioned by Brother Ashraf about Tawarruq, but it's also a weak hadith. So both may be different in parties. INA is undertaken by 2 parties, while Tawarruq is taken by 3 parties. But the result in similar purpose. The purpose is similar. It means to monetize the transaction.
3 menit lagi.
Thank you. The resolution for Muzakara is to hold any product based on the 2 methods until further research for better implementation. Next slide. So by time there are commodity murabaha, including Tawarruq by standard set by FM. We remember 2008, also by FSB 2010, also AAOIFI. Sale of commission is encouraged. Sharia standard of AAOIFI. Next slide. Research of a working group involving National Sharia Board, Central Bank, and Accountant Association finds that Tawarruq is not a transaction. It is a method of doing transaction. So it is not the. That's why they call it murabaha by Tawarruq, ijaro by Tawarruq. Tawarruq method is allowed by some ulama, especially Hanafi, Shafi, and Hanbalis, but refused by Muhammad bin Hassan, Muqayyim, and Ibn Taymiyyah from Hanbali. And purpose of Tawarruq is similar with INA, it means to monetize transaction. Next slide. Methods are not recommended. This is the important result of the working group. It is not recommended to prime product of Islamic finance. Both methods may be utilized in certain conditions, such as emergency. Next slide. And then in 2011, finally, the Sharia Board issued a fatwa on commodity market, just in commodity market, not in banking. With the specialties that the fatwa recommends on commodity can be transacted by each unique position of the parties. It is Tawarruq, but involving 4 parties, not 3 parties, to make sure that it is not monetizing and it is not what you call it Tawarruq munazzam, regulated. And the final slide, please. Bank Indonesia then follow up these 4 banking communities by issuing circular number 1728 on SICA, interbank Islamic certificate on commodity trading. So interbank, it is included in what we call it Islamic financial market, pasar uang antarbank. The conclusion, next slide, is Tawarruq is method of sale is allowed by Sharia scholars. However, its application in Islamic financial products bring risk of creation, bubbling financial assets. That's why the first circumstances should be held. Indonesia make a prudential so that it will not fall into monetization. Tawarruq like INA has been avoided to be prime product Islamic banking in Indonesia, monetize, sell and rent, not for industrial purposes. Maybe it relies for certain conditions such as emergency purpose. To answer Herwin, we are discussing about the alternative of replacing musyarakah for overdraft facility, because it is proven that it is not working in many conditions, and the customer is what you call it overutilized the fatwa. So, then maybe we use WAD for line facility to be applied for that purposes. This is what it is. It is what is utilized or what is applied by Sudan Islamic City Bank. Thank you very much, and I return to Mr. Ronald Rulindo. Sorry for over the time.
Thank you,
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Cecep. And we go. I will go back to Mr. Sohaib. Actually, there are a lot of questions already here, but Mr. Sohaib, maybe you could elaborate the negative effect of Tawarruq in your presentation, point number 3, 5, and 6, in simple way. I mean, for maybe 3 minutes. Yes, could you elaborate the negative effect of Tawarruq in your presentation, point number 3, 5, and 6?
Okay, you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
The third point, if you can put up the points, please.
3, 5, and 6.
Yeah, if you could put
3.
up the slide again, perhaps it will be easier.
Okay. Mas Reza, mungkin bisa ditayangkan?
I guess the third point was a rise in systemic risk due to unhealthy financial innovation, is it?
Yes, that's one, yeah.
Okay. So basically the concept is simple. In a financial system, you have introduction of financial products based on the customer's need, which is the demand side, and the overall risk of the financial system, which you have to balance. And it is the job of the regulator to see whether the demand or the customer need is so severe and so significant that this product should be allowed. On the other hand, each new financial product increases the risk of the financial system because, if it were just a one product financial system, the risk would be low. When you add another product, the risk is higher because the products, obviously, there is an interdependency. So if you have multiple products, 5, 10, 15, 20 different products, the overall financial system risk would increase. So it is a balancing act. You cannot allow every product. You cannot disallow every product either. So you have to look at the genuine value add from each new product introduction, and you have to weigh that against the rise in the financial system risk, and then you make your decision. So, for example, in conventional banking, structured products were allowed, derivatives were allowed. But when the financial crisis hit in 2008, they came up with the regulation that in many markets, short selling was banned for 6 months, 1 year. Why did that happen? Because they thought that it increases the risk of the financial system. So similarly, my argument here is that do not celebrate the introduction of every financial product as something which is necessarily positive for the financial system. It may be positive, it may be negative, and it may be neutral. So you have to look at it, each separate case, and then decide. That's why permissibility alone should not be a reason to allow tawarruq in any market. Sharia permissibility is fine, that's the prerequisite. But then you have to look at what is the product doing to the rest of the product and to the financial system. And if you see that it is actually adding a lot of value, then you allow it. But if you see that either it is not adding value or it is increasing the risk of the financial system to an unsustainable level, then you have to rethink. That's the point. What was the second point? The next point was the fifth point, is it?
Yes, fifth point, moral questions.
Okay, now, yeah. So again, the fifth point is that, let's say in a market, there were only conventional banks and no Islamic banks. In such a case, there may be a lot of people, and we know that there are people in Islamic countries who do not deal with conventional banks. So they don't put their money in the conventional bank, or even if they put it in a current account because they don't want to take interest. And on the asset side, they certainly do not use the bank for auto finance, housing finance, etc. Now we introduce an Islamic bank in the same market. Now this person would be happy that now he has a conduit to place his money in an Islamic bank. He does that. There are multiple Islamic banks that are introduced in that market, and a lot of people put their money in those Islamic banks, thinking that these Islamic banks will use this money in a Sharia compliant manner. But what do these Islamic banks do? They pool the money together and they place it with the conventional bank, because that's an easy way to gain some profit and make use of the excess liquidity. In the end, what has happened? You have collected small amounts of deposit from various individuals and households, and you have given it to the conventional bank. This money is being used to further the cause of conventional banking. That's what has happened at a collective level. So at an individual level, you can argue that there is no Sharia violation that has taken place. But at a collective level, there is a huge Sharia violation, because this person who was never going to help a conventional bank with his money is now indirectly and against his consent helping those conventional banks. And this is happening in all the markets which are allowing Islamic banks and conventional banks to deal with each other on the basis of tawarruq. So the moral question is, should this be allowed in a market or not?
Okay. And number 6, frequent abuses, maybe,
yes.
Maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah, so the frequent abuses, so for example, in some cases, the commodity never moves the go down wherever it is placed, and hundreds, sometimes thousands of transactions take place based on the same commodity. Neither the constructive possession is taken nor the actual possession is taken, and it happens whether it is London Metal Exchange or whatever. And that is the reason why in some of the cases, new regulations needed to be put in place, having 3 parties, having 4 parties. Sometimes, Baina takes place, and for those markets which do not allow Baina, there is an abuse. Of course, for markets such as Malaysia, which do allow Baina, this is not an abuse. So all kinds of various abuses take place because the process is not properly followed. And also, there is a kind of a derivative products come out of it. Derivative not in the normal sense, but in a metaphorical sense. So, for example, in 2009, a global bank introduced a product named as Mayar or Miqyas, where they have used conventional, they have used tawarruq to basically make the income from a conventional bond halal. So an Islamic bank enters into a tawarruq transaction with a conventional bank. The conventional bank buys bonds through this liquidity, and the return of the bonds is passed on to the Islamic bank as profit. All this is done under the cover of tawarruq, and you can't really put your finger on which part of the transaction is prohibited. Actually, none of the various parts of the transaction can be declared prohibited from a Sharia point of view. But this is a natural progression of tawarruq. If you allow tawarruq, this will happen.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sohaib. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go directly to the section 3, which is actually similar to question and answers because I receive a lot of questions already here. And maybe first I would like to ask Pak Cecep. Pak Cecep, is there any possibility that the SNMUI or our Central Sharia Board to maybe expand the fatwa on commodity murabah that allow for something like leasing and so on? And there is also another question from ex-practitioners. He said that the current commodity murabah, the fatwa, I mean the SIKA, I mean Sertifikat Investasi Komoditi Antarbank, which is based on Tawarruq according to fatwa by Dewan Syariah Nasional, it's difficult to be implemented because the fee is actually higher. And at the same time, Bank Indonesia issued a SIMA, the fixed rate SIMA, which is maybe preferable. So what do you think about it?
Yes, you're right. The first question is whether expandable the commodity murabah in what we use in commodity market. According to the agreement conclusion by working group in 2009 or 2010, that this product is controversial and leading to what we call it bubbling financial market. And we just witnessed the negative effects by Mr. Sohaib Umar. And its possibility to expand to into what we call it normal product, it will not be possible. So we still take the stance of that this product should not be expanded into a prime product of normal product, but it has become what we call it in Sharia, the rural on or hajat purposes. For example, for confession, for takeover from conventional banking. While for a normal product like overdraft or for murabah financing, is normal, and then also for the business, it seems to be difficult to implement since the circumstances, the prudentiality regulations will prevent this into effect. Secondly, this is the problem of the market, that using fatwa on commodity trading in Islamic commodity trading in the commodity market has a fee higher than the certificate Mudarabah Antarbank or interbank Mudarabah investment certificate. Yes, because the problem is that the banking should have its own regulation. So we cannot have, we should have a single regulation for all banking, conventional or Islamic banking. On our history, this is the first time that Islamic bank can buy a commodity from other regulation, even conventional, are prohibited to buy share in share market, commodity in commodity market. Only Islamic bank, it is allowed. But when it is allowed, then they should follow what the fatwa regulation has already set up between the four parties. It is to avoid the, what we call it, similarity with INA transaction.
Okay.
It might be higher, then this is the risk.
Okay, get it. So I think the next question is to Mr. Herwin. I think it's from your colleague as well, Pak Rusdi. He said that there are some worried about the use of commodity murabah because this contract would cannibalism the other contracts which has been existed before. So Pak Herwin, what do you think about this? Or maybe you can also provide your response or your thought or anything about the presentation from other speakers, especially from the negative side of commodity murabah from your own perspective, please, Mr. Herwin.
Okay, thank you, Pak Ronald. I think the industry is asking is not converting all akads into Tawarruq. That has been clearly mentioned in my presentation. We are only seeking for 3 products, if I'm not mistaken: overdraft, personal loan, and also for profit trade swap. Again, you know, in Indonesia, if we continue to do the same thing again and again, we will continue to focus on providing consumption only. Yeah, we tend to neglect the providing financing for productive purposes. Yeah, so that's why I think if you look at composition-wise, right, 45% of the portfolio is in consumption in Sharia, versus in conventional, 45% is actually in working capital, so for productive purposes. So I think that's very clear stated upfront. To the questions, or probably the comment to the previous presenter, Brother Umar, Sohaib Umar, and also Cecep, I think the 4 mazhab, they actually recognize the concept of Tawarruq. And if I'm not mistaken, this concept of Tawarruq also for the same reason, be it in the form of classical forms, or even, but the purpose is still the same. That is actually to provide a legal way of avoiding riba. So to me, right, from a simple layman, I think this is also the one that we are asking right now. You know, we are seeking for a temporary solutions. As and when we do have alternative viable solutions, we can always close that structure and move it to the new structure. Same thing also, I think BBA in Malaysia, a long time ago, it was permitted. But since the introductions of commodity murabah or tawarruq, the BNM actually prohibit the use of BB by Bitamen Ajil and move to commodity murabah. Yeah, I think that's it, Pak Ronald.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Herwin.
May I say something?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah.
Okay. See, I am very happy to hear from Sheikh Cecep that he's not thinking of expanding this the use of commodity murabah. I think one other thing that one needs to be careful about is the use of some other backdoor alternative products which can be used for the same purpose as commodity murabah. For example, currency salam. For example, sukuk murabaha. So the implications in each case are slightly different, but the purpose again is the same, and the ill effects are also similar. In some cases exactly as commodity murabaha, in some cases slightly less than commodity murabaha. But we need to be aware of the existence of these products and not allow them for the same reasons. Secondly, regarding Brother Herwin, I think in case of personal finance, you have to see what you can't use commodity murabah as an open tab liquidity tool. You have to look at the purpose for which the funds are needed. If the funds are needed for asset formation, you can easily have either murabaha or ijara for those. But if it is for specific personal needs, for example, if it is for education, for example, if it is for healthcare, or it is for even for let's say for traveling, in each case the Islamic Bank can act as the intermediary, either as the higher education service provider or a medical services provider or a travel agency. So you can partner up with these entities and act as the intermediary. So services ijara model does exist, and it can be used widely to take care of a number of these needs. Of course, it means that the Islamic Bank has to do some more work, some more effort, and that is simply good banking. But to provide an open tap liquidity tool and to let the individual use it for whatever purpose they want, that is basically encouraging indebtedness in the society, and that itself is not a good thing to encourage. So good, decent alternatives do exist, but the banks are not willing to take up those because they have the excuse of commodity murabha available, and in its presence, no other tool or no other product would look 100% as a 100% substitute.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I think if I can comment to Brother Sohaib, yeah, just a quick
Okay, maybe
one.
1 minute, Mr. Herwin.
Yeah. I think we have been trying to find alternative, Brother Sohaib. Yeah, I think since way back when I joined the bank, Islamic banking industry way back in 2005, and up to now we don't have that viable alternative. We can continue like as it is right now. It's a matter of fact right now, you can see the growth of digital financial technology in Indonesia, financial technology industry in Indonesia. That also, I think, dominantly led by conventionals. We don't have a viable structure for that type of fintech for Sharia, for P2P and all that. Other than simple mudarabah, whereby the investor will be taking a lot of risk. So I think we can discuss in great detail. The fact is that we are way behind the conventionals. If let's say the conventional market rebound, if they only grow single digit, we continue to grow double digit, we will continue to be eaten up by conventional banks.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I beg your, mercies to have another 15 minutes for discussion, because we still have a lot of some questions. Now, I'd like to go to Mr. Ashraf. Mr. Ashraf, it is a request from the participant. They would like to know more about how commodity murabah is implemented by using Bursa Suq Al-Sila. And maybe you could also answer another questions related to impact of the Tawarruq to the economics bubble, something like that. From your perspective, how to prevent such things?
So, okay, as far as Bursa Suq Al-Sila, I think I touched on it. This is a national agenda. It's not a simple private company. It has an entire Sharia department. It has Sharia scholars. And from A to Z, everything is there in order to ensure the commodity, position of the commodity, existence of the commodity, the details, as well as regular audits are provided on the commodity providers. The commodity providers are actually, through Bursa, are able to have an additional revenue stream on their idle merchandise that's sitting in the storage before being sold. So all of those things. Also, interestingly, on Bursa is that now not only financial institutions or banks can become members of Bursa and transact the commodities themselves, but even smaller institutions, even corporates, cooperatives can all transact the commodities. So it's not a must actually to give for the bank to be the wakil, to be the agent to liquidate the commodities. I think Bursa wants to be the party that can empower other parties to also be able to implement to sell the commodities, and we see that in the sukuk market. So that's one. I think that's one thing. The second issue about the macro impacts. This is really why I started my presentation with the macro analysis. Okay. And I respectfully disagree with many of the points that my brother Sohaib is mentioning. And we sit on working groups together and disagree all the time, so he doesn't get mad at me. So I think that the issue that number one, there are a lot of things that can be addressed through prudential policy. So we do not necessarily have to use Sharia prohibitions to say this contract, where even though this is allowed, we're not going to allow it because it's tawarruq, and inherently tawarruq is problematic. So when it comes to even things like linking between the real economy and the financial economy. If you look, I mean, in Malaysia, any financing that you do has to have a use of proceeds. So if the use of proceeds is linked to the real economy, then it's linked. If you have things like derivatives, which is the main thing that a lot of times people say may not necessarily be linked, this is where you have your prudential policy to say, okay, if it's for hedging, we'll allow. If it's not for hedging, we don't allow. You can put those things in place, right? Because there is a need to have a balance. Once again, to fulfill the needs. My biggest concern, right, is that we are trying to fight against riba, right? And riba is destructive to the entire Islamic economy. It's destructive to people's relationship with God. It's destructive to the wealth. It's destructive to the society, right? I think we have to come from that worldview. And if we realize that, then we have to say, is tawarruq something important to use to fulfill the needs? I'll tell you here in Malaysia, the discussions that we have in the banks are about, why should we even do conventional? Let's default things to Islamic. Let's default this to Islamic. Let's default that to Islamic. Our brother Herwin was talking about digital. In CIMB, we have a digital account for corporations, and we're talking about making it only Islamic. And if your Islamic product can fulfill all of the needs, then why do you need the conventional? And if through tawarruq, I'm going to get people out of war with Allah, is it really prudent, even from a policy perspective, for me to say, yes, use the other contracts because of certain, concerns? Yes, I really think that the bigger picture from a Sharia angle has to be looked at. So the issues, like I said, of economic, the issues of debt and things of that nature can just as easily be done through a murabaha or an ijara or a musharaka mutanaqisa as through tawarruq. And you can still control the negative impacts through the use of proceeds. That I'm giving tawarruq for this particular purpose, for certain uses. I can control that, right? But like I said, here in Malaysia, in the sukuk market, issuers, first thing they think about is doing Islamic. And we had a non-Sharia compliant company, everybody wants to do Islamic. For me, that is the biggest maslahah for the entire society, getting people out of riba. And I think that should be the first and foremost issue that everyone looks at. And other things, if they're not as high as that, should be given a lower priority. So anyway, that's, I think, my thoughts that I would like to share. Allah knows best.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ashraf.
May
So, I have one question for you, Mr. Sohaib. I mean, because due to the time constraint, maybe you can share with us possible solution, at least for the working capital financing or revolving financings. I mean, instead of commodity murabaha, what kind of akad can be used? Because in Indonesia, I think Mr. Herwin has highlighted before, they use musyarakah, but the private company itself, reluctant to use that.
Sure, I'll come to that, but just before that, a couple of thoughts coming from Brother Ashraf's statements. Just two things. One, there is a statement by Hazrat Umar, and he said that the Prophet left this world, and I'm paraphrasing here, the Prophet left this world without fully explaining riba. So leave riba and everything which is doubtful, which is similar to riba. So I think, when you say, we want to get rid of riba, that's very true. But when we want to make extensive use of tawarruq in order to do that, that's actually a backdoor to riba. That's one thing. The other thing is that, Brother Ashraf, you mentioned that you can control the use of proceeds. No, you can't control the use of proceeds when it is about tawarruq, because you can do that in a mudarba, you can do that in a musharaka, you can do that in an ijara. But in this case, you cannot, because it is a sale purchase transaction. So if the Islamic bank is the seller and the conventional bank is the buyer, how are you going to dictate the use of proceeds, you know, by the buyer? I mean, if I go to a shop to buy something, what I do with that thing that I've bought is my problem, not the shopkeepers. So you can't do that. Now, coming to the question about working capital finance, the most common alternative is murabaha, not commodity murabaha, but proper murabaha. In case of, for example, you have to purchase raw material, you can use murabaha for that, and that's the most common use. The problem comes when you have to finance administrative expenses, because there is no asset behind it. What do you do with it? In some cases, it may be possible to use salam. In other cases, it is not. So there is no easy solution. In Pakistan, they are using running musharaka for that purpose. But again, this product has this issue that you have, you know, a ceiling rate and a you know, a floor rate, and so they have tried to instead of having a musharaka which is absolute, they have tried to make it similar to a fixed profit product, which again kind of defeats the purpose. So other than murabaha, there is no proper solution as far as working capital finance is concerned. If you have a large portion of you know, utilities or admin expenses, salaries, etc. So that's a tough one. But maybe in some cases, even a non-commercial solution would be a possibility. Why not think about an interest-free loan in some cases? So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sohaib. I think last question for Pak Cecep. Pak Cecep, at least from your point of view, of course, you cannot speak in, I mean, on behalf of DSN of Bank Indonesia, but from your own perspective, at least, is there any possibility later on that Indonesia allow commodity murabah for revolving financing or profit rate swap? Ya, Pak. Suaranya, Pak. Mas Reza, mungkin Pak Cecep bisa diinin suaranya.
Okay.
Okay, Pak.
Thank you. Because it is unmuted by the host. My own perspective is that you see, if we are using the what you call it, the common sense, this product is it is just actually same within my own studies on these two markets, two contracts. It is similar. People are using in agriculture society in Indonesia, and they try to monetize this. The ulamas that time do not find any solution for this, except some people even borrowing the gold and sell the gold to the merchant, and then we will buy back after the harvest, panen, after harvest, with the higher price, so that this profit will be become a profit of the lending money. So this is because that time they don't have any solution for them. Today we have so many solutions for this. For example, there was a question by ulamas in Bahrain that, hey, Brother Cecep, do you think that if some people have a certain married disease that he might be ashamed to receive financing by speaking clearly, honestly to the bank that I have this disease. And then he says, I want to buy a car, but then after that I will sell it at discount price to third parties so that this money can be utilized for health purpose. I said that throughout this story, all these debates between the Hanafis and Shafis about the service on Fardu Kifaya. Should Fardu Kifaya be paid or it is freely by people? See, Fardu Kifaya in Indonesia, we know only for praying the janazah, praying the dead people. No, Fardu Kifaya including teaching, become doctor, all service. That's why when National Sharia Board asks whether we can finance Umrah, we can finance marriage ceremony, we can finance what call it health facility. I answered with a positive, very big positive answer. Yes, because in that time, during the Islamic golden era, all these facilities are free, provided by the government. Now they should pay, they should buy. Even married, maybe they provided the mahar, but the ceremony taking place. They should pay, and they should also provide the food. Pay. So my own perspective is that INA and Tawarruq should not be extended into a normal and a prime product. It may be a special, like Herwin proposed that it is only for certain product. That's why we never extend Juala Akad for Bank Indonesia certificate to become a customer product. Otherwise, it will become prime product and it will kill other contract. So this is my own perspective. I hope I'm not so much hard, Brother Ashraf, but this is a perspective from Sharia people, not central bank people. Central bank people should put my cap down then. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Herwin, I mean, that is the last questions. Actually, I agree with you. I mean, it's quite difficult to find an alternative to the commodity murabaha. Last year, when I was in KNEKS, we have some discussion with the market players, even an investment manager as well. Maybe we could shift the commodity murabaha to commodity salam so that it will, I mean, link the financial market with the real sectors. For example, we have Petronas, Pertamina, who, I mean, have a big demand or oil supply. Maybe we could do something with that. And in addition to that, maybe with a commodity berjangka, maybe the commodity exchange, maybe they could develop a platform that people with the Islamic banks, that platform can make a real transaction there to buy a commodity and sell. What do you think about that? I mean, and other than that, maybe you can also provide a closing statement for 2-3 minutes, followed by other speakers later on as well.
Okay, thank you, Pak Ronald. Yeah, I think I agree. Yeah. I think I totally disagree if we use Tawarruq for all our Sharia financing products. Yeah, because that's actually against the principle of us profit risk sharing and all that. Yeah. But I think we have been facing a lot of issues when we try to actually onboard commercials and corporate client. Simple things, when we try to offer them current account, the first questions that they ask, do we have overdraft feature? We tell them no. Then they straight away, they don't want to place their money to us. So I think that's a simple things. I agree if we can actually provide an alternative instead of using Bursa, yeah, we use a real, inventory. But then again, we are taking slightly additional risk to that, yeah. because that means we have to actually, again, that has to be an organized Tawarruq structure again. We have to be able to actually monitor the movement of that product, not to mention the market risk associated with the commodity itself. Yeah. From me, I think this is a very good section. Yeah, I learned a lot from Brother Ashraf, especially also from Brother Sohaib. Same concern also, I think, raised by our scholars in Indonesia and certain degrees from academicians and from regulators. But I think the fact is that, look, we have Islamic banks in Indonesia, it's already almost 30 years. Despite the 84% populations are Muslim, yet market share is still 6.1%. Yeah, I think there must be something wrong with us. Yeah, be it in the it could be the structural issue, it could also be the awareness, or also certain degree to the product that we are not being able to offer a competitive or unique product to our customer. So I think with that, I think we are really hoping that moving forward, we find the solutions quickly so that we are able to penetrate commercials and corporate clients. That's it. Thank you, Pak Ronald.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Herwin. Now, Mr. Ashraf, maybe you would like to give a 1 or 2 minute closing statement. Mas Reza, boleh di unmute, Mas Pak Ashrafnya? Sudah? Bisa di unmute, Pak Ashraf? Host.
Okay, alhamdulillah, now I think I basically, I think my main issue that I want to share from our experience here, in Malaysia. I mean, when Malaysia put their policy for Islamic, their focus really was, I think, two things. One, they wanted to empower Muslims to be able to have all of the financial services that non-Muslims have. So I think that's why the focus really was on level playing field, and so the fiqh, maybe you can say, was more pragmatic. AAEI was there because there was no other structure that would work in the tax structure here. And then after that, when the Tawarruq was available, Tawarruq was opened. Nonetheless, banks, they do use other structures as well, but having, leaving the free market to make the decisions, I think is something significant, something important, without too much intervention. I mean, also too much intervention is also not Sharia, not within the spirit of Sharia in the market. As long as people are not doing something haram and there's not distortions in the market, you should leave people to be free in the market. And I really think that we have this choice between too much idealism, and too much idealism may mean that we are going to accept some percentage of people going into riba, and I don't know whether Allah is going to ask us about that, right? Or maybe being too pragmatic and allowing violations of Sharia in the name of darura where there's no real darura, or the name of need where there's no real need. There is something, I think, in the middle that inshallah we work together to come to that middle ground, and may Allah give tawfiq to everyone here, inshallah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ashraf. Now, Mr. Sohaib, maybe you can give your closing statement for about 1 to 2 minutes.
Yes, I would like to summarize it in three things very quickly. First of all, I think we need to focus on the bigger picture. We need to move away from narrow legalism and technicalism to the broader picture, to the objectives of Sharia, and we have to look at it in those perspectives. And if you look at the picture this way, it will become quite clear which products should be encouraged, which products should not be encouraged. Secondly, Islamic finance is a beautiful thing. Let's not pollute it with dubious products like Tawarruq. And thirdly, in fact, let me add to that. When we tell an individual customer who has no prior knowledge of Islamic banking that you have to sign a few documents, you are buying diamonds from us, and then you are selling diamonds to supplier A or supplier B, and then in the end you get the money, he has questions about the worth of Islamic banking in his head. What is going on? I have not come here to buy diamonds. We say, no. You have to buy the diamonds, and then you have to sell it, and then you are going to get the money. So you are basically polluting the concept of Islamic banking in his head. And if the general public starts to doubt the legitimacy of Islamic banking, that will be the end of Islamic banking. So let's not pollute. Let's also look at the image, the perception, and the overall notion of Islamic banking for the general public. And let's keep that as a parameter in our minds. Thirdly and finally, both Brother Ashraf and I agree that AAOIFI Sharia standard number 30 on Tawarruq should be followed. So if we do that, most of the issues that we come across in various markets regarding Tawarruq would not be there. If the restrictions that are given in the Sharia standard number 30 of AAOIFI are followed, then most of the major issues will be taken care of. So let's agree to that at least.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sohaib. And then last one, Pak Cecep, 1 minute maybe. Moderator, host mungkin bisa bantu di unmute Pak Cecepnya.
Thank you.
Okay.
My principle is that when I joined Islamic Bank first time, is that Islamic banking application as application of Islamic Sharia will never be a final identity, because we are under the circumstances in which against the Sharia itself. So the Islamic banking, Islamic finance, it is just a small picture of Islamic Sharia itself. So I'm not propagating the radicalism or things, because you see every time we applying. No, Mr. Ronald, I'm not radical people. Extremism. No, I mean, you see, sometimes we are using Islam Murabahan, then they put us a double taxation. They put Ijara and double taxation. So we are trying to find out the solution, or why through to the back door, sometimes to the other way around, so that the people say, you say Islamic banking, or actually it is conventional bank, using the picture of great picture about Islamic finance itself. It's like Brother Umar says that it's not clear whether it is Islamic banking or it's conventional banking. So it is never-ending struggle. Islamic finance. So one day maybe our generation, next generation, will see Islamic banking as a true application of Islamic Sharia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Cecep. Ladies and gentlemen, I think due to the time limitation, we have to conclude our international webinar at this point of time. Thank you so much for your active participation. I think I don't need to conclude, because I cannot conclude. But actually, I'm not there to conclude. I'm not brave enough to conclude. But I believe after this, there will be a discussion between KNEKS, Bank Indonesia, OJK, DSN, and maybe that's Bisindo as well to follow up these discussions. But again, I would like to thanks for your active participation, ladies and gentlemen, and of course for the speakers. Thank you so much for your informative and critical share of experience and thought, and as well to the organizer. Congratulate for organizing this very interesting discussion this afternoon. With that, let we end our meeting today by reciting Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin and wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. See you on another occasion.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.